In the story of this woman, royal jewels were not meant to save her. They were meant to be sacrificed. Some vanished forever into the shadows of revolution, others were dismantled by her own choice, and a few endured exile, war, and the profound personal turmoil of their owner. This is the story of Princess Alice of Battenberg, a life where jewelry was far more than a symbol of status. It was the literal currency of the future. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. To understand the woman who would one day break up a priceless Romanov tiara to save her son's future, we have to go back to where her life began. It didn't start in obscurity. Princess Alice of Battenberg was born in 1885 right here in England, in the tapestry room at Windsor Castle. She arrived in the presence of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria herself. Her father was Prince Louis of Battenberg, and her mother, Princess Victoria of Hesse. By birth and upbringing, Alice was a true British princess, though she carried the heavy heritage of German royalty in her blood. She seemed to have everything a child could want, yet her family soon noticed a delay. She was notably slow in learning to speak. An ear specialist confirmed the difficult truth. The princess suffered from congenital deafness. In the Victorian era, this could have meant a life hidden away in the nursery. But Alice's mother took a different, decidedly rigorous approach. Princess Victoria refused to let Alice rely on sign language. Instead, she insisted the girl learn to read lips. It was a method of tough love, intended to force Alice to integrate into the royal world rather than retreat from it. Alice rose to this immense challenge. She learned to read lips fluently in both English and German. Later, after her marriage, she learned French and Greek in the same way. It is startling to consider the sheer willpower required for a child to navigate court life in absolute silence. Yet Alice managed to become known as one of the most attentive and witty members of her circle. She learned early on that she had to fight to be understood. By 1902, Alice was 17 and ready to step onto the great stage of European royalty. The occasion was the coronation of her great-uncle, King Edward VII, in London. Royalty from across the continent flooded into the capital, including a tall, blonde army officer, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, known as Andrea, the fourth son of King George I. Andrew was handsome and known for his sense of humor. Alice, in turn, was widely regarded as the prettiest princess in Europe. Looking back at her immense popularity during those early years, modern biographers have even described her as having a Diana-like quality. It was a genuine love match. They were quite taken with one another, and the romance moved quickly. This meeting set the stage for a wedding that would bring together the great houses of Russia, Britain, and Greece. Emperors and kings were preparing to shower the young bride with diamonds and aquamarines, treasures that would define her status as a royal consort. But looking back at this glittering beginning, it is poignant to realize just how fragile this world actually was. By October 1903, the stage was set in Darmstadt for what would be one of the last great gatherings of European royalty before the world changed forever. Alice and Andrew didn't just have a wedding. They were married 3 times to satisfy the requirements of state and faith, a civil ceremony, a Protestant service for her family, and a Greek Orthodox one for his. The guest list was a testament to the family's immense connections. As reports from the time noted, the congregation included an emperor, an empress, a king, and 2 queens. The emperor and empress were, of course, Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra Fyodorovna of Russia. The Tsarina was Alice's biological aunt, the younger sister of her mother, which made the Tsar her uncle by marriage. Uncle Nicky, as he was known to her, arrived with the full weight of the Romanov treasury behind him. The gifts Alice received were staggering. The Tsar and Tsarina gave their niece 1 million rubles in cash. To put that into perspective for a modern audience, during the gold standard economy of 1903, this was an astronomical fortune. In today's terms, that cash gift alone would be worth well over $15 million. It was the kind of money that could buy entire grand estates. They also presented her with a motor car, which was the absolute height of modern luxury and privilege for 1903. But for jewel historians, the most significant gift was a collection of jewelry valued then at 250,000 German marks, another $2 million in today's money, dedicated entirely to stones and craftsmanship. The centerpiece of this Russian gift was a magnificent parure of diamonds and aquamarines. It consisted of a large tiara, a necklace, a brooch, and a bracelet. Contemporary reports describe the set as being in the graceful empire style, featuring diamonds of the purest water mixed with pale green aquamarines. While the set was visually commanding, it was crafted in a light and graceful empire style, making it remarkable even among the magnificent gifts Alice received. However, on her actual wedding day, Alice chose to wear a different piece with a more intimate history. Photographs show her wearing a tiara composed of diamond stars. These stars were originally a wedding gift from Queen Victoria to Alice's mother in 1884. Alice's mother had lent them to her for the occasion, and they were mounted on a frame to form a bridal tiara. Take a mental snapshot of these two pieces side by side, the immense aquamarine tiara from the Tsar and the diamond star tiara from her mother. On this happy day, they sparkled together, safe in Alice's possession. But history had brutal, divergent plans for both of them. Their paths would soon separate in the most dramatic way imaginable, mirroring the tragic fracture of the royal families themselves. But we will get to that unraveling soon enough. Despite the grandeur of the gifts and the guest list, the day was not without a very human, slightly awkward moment. As we discussed, Alice had mastered lip reading to an extraordinary degree, turning her deafness into a quiet strength. But the sheer nerves of her wedding day proved to be a different challenge entirely. During the civil ceremony, when the registrar asked if she willingly took Prince Andrew as her husband, Alice misunderstood the movement of his lips. In front of the gathered kings and queens, she clearly and confidently answered, "No." When the flushed registrar hastily asked if her heart was perhaps given to another, she replied with an equally confident, "Yes." The error was quickly corrected, and the marriage proceeded to laughter and relief. Yet, this little slip-up reminds us of the constant, invisible effort Alice had to make just to participate in her own life. In the noisy, chaotic court of Athens that awaited her, her ability to read the room would become her most vital tool. She was young, beautiful, and wealthier than she could have ever imagined. But as the couple drove away for their honeymoon in the motor car gifted by the Tsar, the clouds were already gathering over the very relatives who had just toasted their health. By 1922, the fairy tale had officially dissolved into a nightmare. The Greek monarchy was not stable. It was a pendulum that swung violently between glory and exile. After a disastrous military campaign, the blame fell squarely on the leadership, including Prince Andrew. The situation was terrifyingly real. Andrew was arrested, accused of treason, and faced a revolutionary firing squad. He was only saved at the 11th hour by the intervention of his British cousin, King George V, who sent a Royal Navy cruiser to rescue the family. The contrast between Alice's arrival in Greece and her departure could not have been more stark. She had arrived in a motor car gifted by an emperor. She left as a refugee with almost nothing. There is a detail from this escape that has become legendary. They had no crib for their youngest child, an 18-month-old toddler named Philip. So, the sailors improvised. The future Duke of Edinburgh, husband to Queen Elizabeth II, slept his way to safety in a crate originally designed to hold oranges. Amidst the chaos of orange crates and fleeing for their lives, Alice had managed a feat of incredible presence of mind. The records note that they were able to smuggle some jewelry in their clothes. The massive Russian aquamarine parure made it out, but not every treasure was so lucky. This brings us to the first great loss associated with Alice's story, the mystery of the diamond star tiara. It is a detail often misunderstood, as the tiara Alice wore on her wedding day was not actually her own. She had borrowed it from her mother, Victoria of Hesse. Those stars were originally a wedding gift from Queen Victoria to Alice's mother back in 1884, and they remained firmly in her mother's collection. The tiara stayed with Victoria, but its fate was sealed by a trip mother and daughter took together. In 1914, Alice and her mother visited their relatives in Russia, Tsar Nicholas and Empress Alexandra. When the threat of war became immediate, they had to scramble to get back to England, and Victoria chose to leave her heavy jewels behind for safekeeping in the Empress's vault. We all know the tragic history that followed. The Russian Revolution swept away the Romanovs, and the Bolsheviks seized the imperial treasures. Those original diamond stars, which Alice's mother had lent her for her wedding, were likely lost forever in that turmoil, vanishing alongside the crown jewels of Russia. But there is a second chapter to the story of the star jewels. To comfort Victoria after the loss of her original pieces in Russia, her aunt, Princess Louise, gave her a replacement set of pearl and diamond stars. This allowed a new tiara to be created, mirroring the one Alice had worn as a bride. It is a curious turn of history that this replacement did not find its way back to Alice. Instead, in 1922, Victoria chose to give the new star tiara to her daughter-in-law, the wealthy and glamorous Edwina Mountbatten. While it might seem poignant that Alice didn't receive this version of her wedding jewels, the decision likely had a very practical foundation. At that time, Alice was living as a refugee, and her life was entering a period of profound instability. By passing the stars to the Mountbatten branch of the family, Victoria ensured the design of Alice's wedding day was preserved. Today, the tiara remains a private heirloom of the Mountbatten Knatchbull family. Though it is rarely seen in public now, we caught a beautiful glimpse of it as recently as 2016, when it was worn by Lady Penny's daughter Alexandra for her wedding at Romsey Abbey. It stands as a reminder that while Alice's original imperial diamonds were lost to the Revolution, the memory of her wedding sparkle was kept safe for the next generation. Having lost her status and her home, Alice settled into a life of genteel poverty in Paris. But the trauma of the execution threats, the exile, and the displacement began to fracture her mind. By 1930, Alice began to experience severe religious delusions, claiming she was receiving divine messages. The family was desperate. They turned to famous psychiatrists, including Sigmund Freud. The diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia. The treatment recommended by the doctors was harsh and experimental for its time. There is no record that Alice consented to any of it. In fact, the story of her institutionalization is heartbreaking. On a day in 1930, while her young son Philip was taken out for a picnic to get him out of the house, doctors arrived. Alice was sedated and put into a car by men in white coats. She was driven to a sanatorium in Switzerland, a high-class facility that was, for her, a prison. She would be kept there for 2 years, fighting for her release, while her husband drifted away to the French Riviera and her children were scattered across Europe. It is one of the darkest chapters in royal history. A princess born in Windsor Castle, now locked away and abandoned by the family she loved. But as the doors of the sanatorium closed on Alice, a practical question remained. She was locked up, her husband was absent. Where were the rest of the jewels? Where were the aquamarines that would one day save the monarchy? While Alice battled her demons in Switzerland, the Russian aquamarines were sitting silently in the Paris branch of the Westminster Bank, waiting for the moment they would be needed to rescue her son. This brings us to a part of the story where, I must admit, even the most seasoned jewelry historians find themselves at a crossroads. We are looking at the Great Romanov Gift, that magnificent parure given by the Tsar and Tsarina in 1903. The official reports from that time are quite specific. They describe a superb tiara, necklace, brooch, and bracelet featuring diamonds and pale green aquamarine stones. But as I spent time looking closer at the archival photographs and the research of fellow enthusiasts, the clarity began to fade. You see, there is a persistent and very compelling theory that these stones were not aquamarines at all, but rather light-colored Ceylon sapphires. The reason for this confusion lies in a nearly identical necklace that appeared at a Russian auction decades later. That piece was a confirmed Fabergé work, set with graduated oval salon sapphires. When you compare the two, the design is almost a mirror image. It makes me wonder, did the newspapers of 1903 simply see a light blue-green stone and assume aquamarine because it was a more common term? Or was Alice's set a unique aquamarine version of a popular Fabergé design? I find myself going back and forth on this, and honestly, the truth remains locked in the past. The mystery only deepens when we look at Alice's necklace, and these two portraits tell the story better than any archive. If you look at the image on the left, from the early years of her marriage, the necklace is a delicate choker, hugging the base of her throat. But in the later portrait on the right, those same stones drape much lower, forming a graceful, longer curve that rests against her chest. It seems Alice was using a very practical royal trick. She likely attached her matching bracelet to the necklace to give it more length. It's a clever bit of jewelry editing, isn't it? But while the necklace and the matching brooch eventually slipped into the shadows of history, leaving us to wonder if they were sold during the family's hardest years, or if they still sit unrecognized in a private collection, the tiara was destined for a much more public and much more sacrificial fate. Its story didn't end with Alice. In fact, we'll soon see how its diamonds were reborn to play a starring role in the most famous royal romance of the 20th century. However, there is one modern echo of these stones that I find particularly fascinating. When I first read that historical description of pale green aquamarine stones, my mind went straight to a modern piece we often see today, the versatile tiara belonging to Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. It turns out, in my wandering imagination, I am not alone. Some jewelry watchers have long speculated that the massive, seafoam-colored stone at the center of Sophie's tiara might actually be a survivor from Alice's Romanov parure, perhaps taken from that missing brooch or a piece of the mysterious necklace. While this remains a beautiful theory without firm evidence, I find the idea quite moving. It would be a poetic full circle for a stone that once belonged to Philip's mother to find its way to the wife of her grandson, Edward. It feels especially fitting since they now hold the titles once belonging to Philip and Elizabeth, carrying the Edinburgh legacy into the future. The documented history, however, suggests a more contemporary origin. This striking piece, with its wave-like diamond pattern, made its debut in 2005 at a gala in Monaco. It is widely believed to be a gift from Queen Elizabeth II to her daughter-in-law, reportedly crafted by the jewelers G. Collins and Sons. After being released from the sanatorium in 1932, Alice spent years living a quiet, almost nomadic life in Germany, distanced from her husband and children. It took a devastating family tragedy in 1937, the death of her daughter Cecile in a plane crash, to finally bring her back to her family. By the time World War II erupted, Alice was back in Athens, where she traded her royal status for the apron of a nurse, working in soup kitchens and even risking her life to hide a Jewish family from the Nazis. By 1947, when she arrived in London to help care for her aging mother, Alice had emerged from the shadows of her illness as a woman of incredible resilience. But she was a princess without a fortune. This brings us to the moment when Alice's jewelry ceased to be a mere collection of beautiful objects and became a decisive force in royal history. Her son, Philip, had fallen deeply in love with the heiress presumptive to the British throne. While he was a prince of Greece by birth, he was, in practical terms, a man of very limited means. He needed an engagement ring that could stand alongside the historic jewels of the House of Windsor, but a naval officer's modest salary could never provide one. Alice's solution was both practical and profoundly selfless. She retrieved her jewelry from the Paris branch of the Westminster Bank, a task that required the legal signatures of all her children, as the pieces had been locked away since her institutionalization in 1930. From the vault, she took the grandest piece she owned, the Romanov aquamarine and diamond tiara. She handed it to Philip with the instruction that it be dismantled to provide the stones for his future bride. Philip took the diamonds to the jeweler Philip Antrobus on Bond Street. He didn't just hand over the stones, he was heavily involved in the design, wanting something that was both classic and personal. The result was a 3-carat round diamond solitaire, set in platinum and flanked on each side by 5 smaller diamonds. There is a charmingly human detail about the ring's debut. Because the romance had been kept so private, Philip hadn't been able to take the measurements of the princess's finger. When he finally proposed at Balmoral, the ring was significantly too large. It had to be hastily resized just in time for the official announcement in July 1947. Elizabeth clearly cherished this gift above almost all others. Even after she gained access to the world's most magnificent jewelry collections, this ring remained her most personal treasure, never leaving her finger for over 70 years. Over time, it even developed a practical role. Her staff knew that if the Queen began to twist the ring during a conversation, it was a silent signal that she was ready to end the meeting. But the tiara was so substantial that the diamonds for the ring were only the beginning. Philip used the remaining stones to create a second, equally impressive gift, the Edinburgh wedding bracelet. If the ring was classic, the bracelet was a bold statement of modern style. It is a large, geometric Art Deco piece set in platinum, featuring 3 large white brilliant-cut diamonds centered within square links. Jewelry historians have often remarked on the bracelet's design, describing it as brash, imposing, and more than a little bit masculine. It seems Philip's own personality was forged into the platinum. Elizabeth wore it on many of the most significant occasions of her life, from early portraits as a young queen to her official Diamond Jubilee portrait in 2012. In more recent years, this legacy passed to a new generation. In her later years, Queen Elizabeth II loaned the Edinburgh wedding bracelet to her granddaughter-in-law, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. And whenever I notice it on her wrist, it feels like a quiet bridge across time, back to Princess Alice's sacrificial gift, and beyond that, to the vanished imperial world of the Tsars. The story of Alice's jewelry usually centers on what was lost or broken, but there is one piece that stands as a remarkable survivor. This is the meander tiara, a diamond bandeau featuring the classic Greek key design, or meander pattern, punctuated by a central laurel wreath and 2 honeysuckle elements. The origins of this piece remain a bit of a mystery, which only adds to its allure. Some historians, including Geoffrey Munn, suggest it was created in France around the turn of the century, perhaps by the House of Cartier. While Alice likely acquired it after her marriage to Prince Andrew in 1903, it only began appearing in portraits around 1914. There is a fascinating theory that this tiara was actually a second life for another jewel. Before 1910, Alice frequently wore a versatile diamond necklace tiara featuring 6-pointed stars. After that year, that necklace vanished from public view, and shortly after, the meander tiara appeared. It is highly possible Alice chose to refashion the older diamonds into this more modern, culturally significant design. This piece remained with her through every period of exile, and even during her long confinement in Switzerland, safe in a London bank vault. It is interesting to consider why Alice chose to save this specific jewel. While she was willing to sacrifice the Romanov diamonds for Philip's future, she kept the meander tiara whole. She eventually gave it to her new daughter-in-law, Princess Elizabeth, as a wedding gift in 1947. But here we encounter one of the great curiosities of the British royal collection. Despite owning this beautiful historic piece for decades, Elizabeth was never once photographed wearing it. This seems a deliberate choice for a sovereign who otherwise wore almost every significant heirloom in her vault. Perhaps she felt the piece was too modest for a reigning queen, or perhaps she simply preferred to save it for a different purpose. The tiara remained in the shadows until 1972, when the Queen officially handed it over to her daughter, Princess Anne. This proved to be an inspired decision. The strict, geometric lines of the Greek key pattern seemed to suit Anne's no-nonsense character and her role as a hard-working member of the family. Anne has worn the tiara regularly for decades, from official portraits to state banquets, turning it into one of her signature pieces. I find a profound sense of continuity in this transition. Alice was a woman of immense resilience, who faced her struggles with a quiet, steely determination. It feels deeply symbolic that her tiara found its permanent home with Anne, who is often described as the most industrious and stoic of the modern royals. The meander tiara's journey reached a new milestone in 2011 when Anne loaned it to her daughter, Zara Phillips, for her wedding in Edinburgh. Seeing Zara pairing her great-grandmother's tiara with her bridal veil brought the story into the 21st century. It was a visible tribute to the family's Greek heritage, a legacy that Alice fought so hard to preserve. But as this tiara continues to shine on Alice's descendants, we must remember that her collection held one more secret, a piece that represented the final, tragic chapter of her daughter's lives in Germany. It is the story of a jewel that didn't find safety in a British vault, but instead faced a much more destructive end. While we often focus on the jewels that found a safe haven in London, there was another part of Alice's collection that told a much darker story. This was her German heritage, the pieces that passed to her 4 daughters, all of whom had married into German princely houses. Among these was a particularly striking piece, the turquoise coronet. It was a delicate diamond tiara featuring diamond trefoils set with vibrant turquoises. Alice had most notably worn it for a series of portraits in the 1910s, often paired with a matching turquoise necklace. Like her other treasures, it had been locked away in that Paris bank vault for decades. When Alice retrieved her jewels in 1947, she didn't keep the coronet for her new British life. Instead, it seems to have been inherited by her eldest daughter, Margarita, who had become the Princess of Hohenlohe-Langenburg. Margarita was seen wearing the coronet as late as 1962 at a glittering royal ball in Athens. It seemed, for a moment, that this piece of Alice's history would remain a staple of the family's grand occasions. But a shadow seemed to hang over this branch of the family, as if the turmoil that had defined Alice's middle years refused to let go. In 1963, a devastating fire tore through Schloss Langenburg, the family's ancestral home in Germany. But even before the flames arrived, the family's treasures had been quietly vanishing. They were selling their jewels to support their Russian relatives who had escaped the Bolsheviks with nothing. By the time the fire broke out in the 60s, many of those velvet slots in the jewelry cases were already empty. The fire simply claimed the few pieces that were left. Alice's granddaughter, Princess Cecile, later spoke of the poignant discovery of those original jewel cases, beautiful empty boxes with a vivid Yves Klein blue lining. She described how the trays still bore the deep imprints of the tiaras and necklaces that were no longer there. They were, in her words, like echoes of past times, where the only thing left of a grandmother's empire was a shape in the velvet. This brings us back to Alice herself in the final years of her life. By the late 1940s, she had largely turned her back on the world of grand galas. She had founded her own nursing order, the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, and she had traded her silk gowns for a simple gray habit. To fund her work, to build her convent and feed the poor of Athens, she began to sell what little she had left. You might remember a scene from the series The Crown, where an elderly Alice tries to sell a large brooch to support her nuns. Visually, the piece created for the screen is a striking match for the brooch from that imperial Romanov parure. While the real jewel's ultimate fate remains undocumented, we know that Alice frequently sold her smaller pieces for charity, so this ending feels very grounded in her actual life. What I find most intriguing, however, is that the show's characters specifically refer to the stone as a Ceylon sapphire. It raises a fascinating question. Was this just a bit of artistic license to imply a more valuable gem? Or did the show's researchers stumble upon the same evidence we've been discussing? They might be subtly backing the theory that Alice's treasures were rare sapphires all along. It is a staggering retrospective. She began her married life in 1903 with a gift of 1,000,000 rubles and a mountain of imperial diamonds. Yet, by the time she moved into her small room at Buckingham Palace in 1967, she had given it all away. She had transformed her material wealth into a different kind of legacy, one of service and sacrifice. When she passed away in 1969, her Her only worldly possessions were 3 simple dressing gowns. As we close the vault on Alice's collection, it's impossible not to feel a touch of melancholy for everything that was lost: the vanished stars, the burned turquoise, and those hauntingly empty blue boxes. But perhaps that only makes the pieces that did survive feel more precious. They are more than just beautiful objects. They are the few remaining witnesses to the long, arduous path Alice walked. Though Queen Elizabeth II is no longer with us, the engagement ring she wore every day for 7 decades remains the ultimate symbol of Alice's selfless love. And then there is the Edinburgh wedding bracelet. I truly hope we will continue to see it on Catherine, the Princess of Wales, in the years to come. Every time that geometric diamond frame catches the light at a state banquet, it acts as a bridge. It connects us back to a princess who was willing to break apart her tiara crown so her son could begin a new life. When these pieces appear in public today, whether it's the bracelet on Catherine or the meander tiara on Princess Anne, it's hard not to look past the sparkle and see the history. You see the exile, the orange crates, the silence of her deafness, and the eventual, quiet grace of her final years as a nun. For me, that is the true value of these diamonds. They carry the weight of her resilience. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden heart of Alice's treasures, I would be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. It means so much to share these stories with people who appreciate the depth behind the gems. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Jewels may be silent, but as we've seen with Alice, their stories will never truly be lost as long as we continue to tell them. I'll see you in the next story.